Big hey now, everybody, on this sunny Sunday. How you all doing? All right, let's do it. Let's do a check, sound check. Make sure everybody can hear me. Oscar. Yes, Quattro Cinco. Quattro Cinco. All right. So this is the HEX T-Share report. All right. So we're not talking about the token side, the speculation side on price. All right, this is what we're talking about is HEX and HEX staking specifically, which is why we're talking about T-shares, right? So it's an important kind of distinction. And so what I'm going to be talking about as we get into the normal reports and stuff is I just want to talk about this 15-year cycle as I see it, and how things have been playing out. And again, this is separate from what we, the price speculation that people do back and forth, right? And so right now, the narrative that's out there is that HEX has lost its believers, right? Even I've, at times kind of played with that. I talk about believers becoming true believers, that people have given up, that conviction has faded. But the data is actually showing something different, again, in terms of staking. And it's clear. I quite often get a lot of people, on the prowl because they don't like the prices, what's happened with prices, which is a totally different conversation than this. This is about HEX and the HEX supply. And of course, long-term price does matter in terms of when people do something with their HEX. So what's actually happened during this period of time is HEX has been filtering out people. That's what's been happening. Short-term capital that came in and staked, a lot of that is left. We still do have, rotating short stakes. Speculators didn't lose belief per se. I mean, a lot of them are still chasing the price and waiting for that, but it definitely failed the time test. In this process, HEX has changed. Right, the first 5 years were an experiment. Teaching people how to value time, penalties, learn about patience, and now we're moving into the second phase, right? And then there'll likely be a third phase, and this is where we can start talking about these three things on the visual here. When we first saw HEX and it came out, participation was pretty wide and diverse. People were chasing those green candles for sure. Many of us did not understand yet the penalties, opportunity cost, and that really this is the monetization of time, right? And that time is the primary variable. So some people came in because they were curious, they were looking at the yields. They liked the idea of getting a lot of tokens, definitely price speculation. And then narrative momentum, right? People chasing the momentum. Again, seeing those green candles. And during this phase, it was necessary because people learned, about losing in terms of price, early endings, ending your stakes early, poor durations. But what it actually did is it taught the participants what time actually costs, right, in terms of HEX. So in kind of like a broad way, what we learned was, often really the hard way, is how HEX really works, right? That's during this first 5 years that we've seen. Now we're into the second 5 years, and we know the OA did this major staking, and and it obscures things, right? Because if you're not in on understanding the OA and the idea that the OA probably is not ever going to sell, I say probably, but I mean we've never seen it, right? So that represents a huge amount of supply and market dynamics that are basically locked up, right? And has the majority of the T-shares that are out there, et cetera. So as we go into the second 5-year period, what we're really seeing now is the transition, I believe, to what I call the true believers, right? People who really have conviction that continue to stake. And, we're seeing the HEX ecosystem move into more of a bond market, right? This is where people who are staking they're intentionally staking for the times. I mean, there's nobody, I can't imagine there's anybody out there who does Quattro Cinco now that doesn't understand that that is an extreme position to take, right? And so this is where I believe we're going to start seeing, HEX begin to act more like a bond market, because the experiment portion of it's over. And so what are we seeing along with that? The average open stake links are rising, right? Why are they going to rise? Well, they're going to rise because all the short stakes that were done, as they end, and even when I say short, I say, like 1,000 days or 2,000 days, 2,500 days. As they end, all that is left are the older stakes, right? There will be new ones that get made, but on average, we should see that begin to rise. We see it kind of flat right now, but I think we're going to see that. New stakes are shorter but deliberate. We can see that in the Quattro Cincos and in the bow wave, right? Quattro Cincos are pretty low, in terms of people going out super long with that super long conviction. But what we are seeing is very intentional ladders being put in place and shorter stakes being put in place. Long durations, the Quattro Cinco still happen, but it's very selective. It's very, very much the participants understanding that time risk, or at least they think they do, and going out further. And of course, with things like the availability of DESI or Maxi on the market, or the actuator protocol, HSIs, there are some other things that people might be doing as well, with longer stakes. Of course, Maxi and DESI are not being reissued, but people do go into HSIs for the actuator protocol, which is an extension of the bond concept as well, right? And so I think what we're seeing in terms of the HEX staking and the T-shares, et cetera, is that the duration, how long people lock up, is much better understood, and it's being priced in terms of the HEX cost, right? And again, in terms of HEX, people aren't any longer sitting there and go, hey, what's the APY? We already know it's somewhere around 4 to 5%. Currently competitive with treasuries, and it can only go up from here. I believe it can only slowly, gradually go up, or if the OA made big moves, potentially go up faster, or if we just happen to have enough capitulation, maybe we'd see a bump from people. But again, the OA controls the majority of the T-shares, so it's very difficult for, certainly no individual user can overcome that. And, it would require a great amount of the population to capitulate, right? To really make anything really big happen as we go forward into this. And so now, what does that mean when people are doing the staking? Is they're looking at it and they're saying, well, how long am I willing, what am I comfortable doing? Right. And this is where things like evaluating yield curves, and again, actuator type protocols, or other protocols that are time-based instruments, things that where people can figure out ways to utilize the underlying HEX market. And then in big part, and I get this question a lot from people, that people are interested in, when is the HEX coming out? What is the liquidity going to look like at that time, etc. Right? And so really what's happening here is HEX is becoming the market where time is the asset. Time is the asset, right? So it's a combination, of course, with the staking of the HEX, but it's really what it is. So we start looking out into the third phase, which is the 10 to 15 years out there into the future. Pretty much most of the short duration capital should have rotated out. Though people will still make, I'm sure, still make shorter stakes. I mean, we do see 20, 30, 40 million HEX stakes short coming out on a regular basis, where people are picking up, those returns, but they pay a price for doing that. The price they pay is that they lose their ability to get the T-shares back. you know, that type of thing. And so, what would we end up with is an awful lot of stakes that are long and highly intentional. All right, and that over time, in terms of the T-shares, they become thin and more scarce, and this is the one that kind of blows people's minds, because this isn't talking about the hex price appreciation. I'm talking about hex supply, right? So as people who are continuing to stake, their stakes mature, they begin to get a much larger share overall of the hex, because again, the hex emissions, right? And so price becomes kind of a different animal. If you've got 10 times the amount of hex and the price is the same, you still have 10 times the amount of value, right? Whatever it might be. I'm making that up, the 10x as an example. 2x, 3x, whatever it is. So you end up in a situation where you can still win with the price being stagnant, right? And that's because the participants in, again, hex staking, guys. Now I'm talking about the 10,000 X's and what everybody's interested in talking about, from normal crypto, right? Because those folks who are super interested in I'm interested in 1,000X, of course, right? But those who are super interested in the X's as the only reason to participate, they're not interested in staking. That's my assessment. Maybe they are. Maybe I'm wrong about that. You guys tell me in the chat, right? But I kind of think that, right? All right. So what does all this do, right? So we have this walled garden effect. I kind of talked about this before, where only people that come into the walled garden are the ones that want to come in. No longer, by accident I Quattro Cinco'd. That's not a thing. I suppose it could be that somebody makes a mistake and it's 5555, but I suppose that's still possible. But in people come into the wall garden, they enter because they want to. It's a very high conviction signal, meaning convicted in this process and hex. It's low noise, right? There ain't a lot of people going to make 100 Quattro Cincos because they didn't want to, right? Just like I said, right? And so new entrants are going to self-select for that, right? They're going to decide whether they want to be convicted that way. They want to get into it. And then during this process, right, the time value of hex becomes more and more scarce. Hex is going to become a more hardened, conviction-driven time market, and participation is more rare, will be more rare. It's deliberate and powerful. It's deliberate and powerful. I know, again, most people will equate power to value and price. And so, yeah, over time, we're just going to have to watch the market. I mean, I can't tell you what's going to happen in 15 years, what the liquidity is going to look like, what people are going to be willing to pay for hex. But in terms of how this process works, the hex process, and being able to accumulate as much hex as possible, right? And yeah, and so this is where we're moving on. So very high level, that's my little spiel on this. I mean, we really are going through a filtering event, and it's quite often, right? It's very polarizing, love it or hate it. Hex staking, love it or hate it. But it's funny, even the haters are willing to speculate that the price will go way up, right? So you have that going on. All right, so let's go take a look, see what's going on with our T-shares and what's going on out here. So just looking out, into 27, we can see in red, we're slowly crawling up in the hex per T-share count, what it costs to get a T-share. That's going to continue, goes up and to the right. That's all it does. We're still basically on target. These numbers aren't changing on a daily basis significantly, right? It's little tiny bits. We'll see it change over time, but and that's why we go over this. Kind of proves out that the system's working as expected. And so when we look at things like the 30-day, Excuse me, sorry about that. I tried to hit the mute, but I couldn't get it. All right, we look at 30 days out, both chains, slowly approaching that 45 level, 60 days out, assuming we actually see the stakes end that would make the changes. We go out 60 days, we should be at 45K on both chains. You can see a crossover potentially here and this may, I'll have to look and see. I don't believe that's going to be the OA stake. I don't think it can be, but maybe. But anyways, we do have a stake that's out there ending right around 324, March 24th, that if it was to end, it could flip the rate so that Pulse Chain would be higher than the Ethereum side. That's possible. And then going out into April, we could see another flippening where ETH could regain at a higher number, but the numbers are so close. I mean, they're really close. I mean, it's not like it's just an overly significant amount of difference in these. What we're beginning to see at this level is the permutations of the different staking profiles, right? The people, the demographics of the people that have actually been doing the staking. We got 120 days, and we'll be approaching the 46K level. And then when we look into at the end of 26, maybe we'll hit 49,000, 50,000 by the end of 26, and then continue to move up and to the right as we go. We do continue to see the drawdown. It actually, things have been quiet, man. I mean, everywhere. But I'm seeing the drawdown over the last 30 days that 45% of the stakes on Ethereum, the T-shares that end on Ethereum are not being recreated. Again, reinforcing this idea, right, that people are not as many people going out long. It's only this people are really solidly committed to it. 43% on Pulse Chain not being recreated. Why is that? If we go look at the terms and we see some of these stakes, well, the why has to do with, hey, listen, maybe they're just here fooling around. It's not for them, right? They're not interested in continuing. But if we look at individual stakes that are coming up and ending, these are in order by end date, we can begin to see some interesting stuff. Here's a stake that was a 1,330-day stake for 10,000 hex. For the person to keep the same number of T-shares, they have to put all of their hex back in, including the rewards, the principal and rewards, and increase their time by 60% to get the same number of T-shares, or increase the amount of hex and do it for the same number of days by 12%, right? So people are faced with a decision of if they want to maintain their T-shares to either add or go longer. And so that decision typically hasn't been made that way. In between positions, some people will scrape and then restake. But again, you can see from the numbers, that's not the majority of people. Here's a larger stake that was in for 880 days. This one is for 420,000 hex. They would have to either have to go out to 1,541 days with all of the hex, including the rewards, which is a 75% increase, or add another 100,000 hex to that pile and go out for the same 880 days. So again, you can see what's happening with the calculations, right, and the math. In order for people to be able to get exactly the same thing, they have to go pretty far. Now, we do have each one of these is individually calculated, right? That's how the system works. And so we do have conditions like this one to show you the other side of this. Is a short 6-day stake for 50 T-shares. And they would, again, to maintain their T-shares, they would have to put it all back in. And even though it does say 6, they probably have to go out 7 days. It's really close to being because it's such a short stake. They probably have to go out 7 days. They certainly lose a day. But they would have to put it all back in to get the same number of T-shares. And so what happens if somebody is doing a regular rotation, their own little bow wave of their 2.2 million HEX. Well, they get less and less T-shares every 6 days, if that's what they're doing. They cannot maintain that, right? And because they're getting less T-shares, they're getting less payout, and that means their ROI is going down. So they can almost maintain it. By definition, they can't get exactly the same number of T-shares for the same number of days, but you can see how it gets really close. It gets really, really close. And then when we look at some of the much older stakes, like I see a 2,000-day stake. Look at that. Here's a 2,200-day stake. So this is the power of the original believers, right? So here's a 2,200-day stake that was made January 1st or January 13th of 2020. And that was for 1.1 million HEX, and it was 242 T-shares. Well, they earned so well on their stake over that time that they only would have to go out, put all of it back in, and go out 2,255 days and get the same amount of T-shares. Right? So they could just go out a little bit further and maintain it. So those folks are the ones who have the opportunity to get as many T-shares, right, as they had before. But again, we are seeing that 30 to 40% downtrend in that, when those end, people are not doing it. So this just gives you a little bit of an insight into what's happening as people are ending their stakes and who has the opportunity. The people who gained the most HEX have the greatest opportunity to maintain their T-shirts. So again, we're talking about HEX staking here, guys. This is HEX staking. This is not about the price appreciation portion of crypto and that speculation. So again, we're seeing on Ethereum minus 45, 46% in the last month, minus 43% on the Pulse chain side. If we forecast that into the future, that would mean we lose another 30 to 40,000 T-shares on both chains over the upcoming month. Right? We look at our T-share count and how that's been going. We can see that the T-share count, pretty obvious that it's going to be dropping, but let's go out to 25. It looks kind of flat here, but in reality, once we get past that OA stake, you can just see the continuous downtrend of the T-shares and the T-share count. That's going to happen. That's going to continue to happen. And as that happens, your payout per T-share will slowly rise, right, over time. So if we go again, we go out to, let's do here. We can see once this updates that, we're going to slowly see this T-share payout go up. So your APR is likely at the lowest level that it could be. And then over time, it'll go up. And then the majority for the long stakes, Quattro Cinco, the majority of the payouts are going to come accumulatively in the last portion of your stake. Right, so that's when you would earn the most HEX, is probably the last portion. Now, in these estimates and forecasts they put up, they're based on people doing restaking at a more aggressive level, which makes this more conservative. These payouts more conservative, and so it's likely these payouts, my estimation, will go up faster. And of course, I'm also assuming that the OA is going to actually end their stakes. Okay, but I don't know that the OA is going to do that. So we're going to have to wait and see. And I guess our first indication of that will be this March-April timeframe when we see that stake come out or come up for ending. And does it get good accounted or does it get ended? If it gets ended, then that means one thing. If it gets good accounted, it means another. Right? Good accounted would just mean that somebody good accounted it, whether it's somebody else or the owner, and those T-shares just drop out of the pool. And then everybody's payout goes up. So that could happen. If it gets ended, the T-shares still come out of the pool. So everybody's payout goes up. But an awful lot more HEX gets minted. Well, at least some will get minted. When you do a good accounting, unless there's some sort of penalty for being late, you do not see HEX minted from a good account, right? It's just sitting there inside the contract, quote unquote, sitting there inside the contract. It doesn't get minted. But when you do an end stake, the rewards get minted. And when rewards get minted, they get added to the supply that's inflated. And so you would see an increase in payout. So if it does actually get ended, not only do you see a primary increase of payout per T-share for everybody, you also get more HEX minted, which increases the amount of HEX that gets paid out per day, which gets divided by those number of T-shares, and so you get even more payout for everybody, right? So again, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. That's what forecasting is all about, kind of guessing, right, as to the future, and we can kind of see that. We know for certain that our HEX stakes slowly, it doesn't show it well here, it shows it kind of like flat, but slowly increasing over time, the average length of open HEX stakes. Why is that? Remember, it's an average of open stakes. It's a measurement of what did people stake for, and give me the average of this number of days. So they so pretty much going to be going up, right? Pretty much going up. It should just slowly increase. PHEX goes up a little slower than the EHEX. We still have a lot of the short stakers actually participating in the pulse chain side as opposed to the Ethereum side. But so these are slowly going up. We look at what's been created. You can see also that phenomena on the Ethereum side, which is in pink, that the average HEX stake created is going up 4.4 years. I wouldn't exactly say we're on a downtrend per se on Pulse Chain. It does look like a downtrend. I guess we'll have to wait it out and see. But we are down to 3.4 years on average, which these are all HEX stakes created. So that means whether they're short or long, whether they're open or closed, they're being counted because they were created in this time period. So again, kind of pointing to the fact that we're not seeing the T-shares being created out there in the future. We look at our 2041 look ahead here, 2040-41. Out in April of 41, we're just at 370 T-shares right now. We've been running between 1 and 3,000 per month out there. It's not the same as the calendar month here. I'll show you that in a moment. But because in the 15.2 years is does not line up month to month, month over month, but it's been fairly regular between 1,000, 2,000 T-shares. With this big old away stake here in April of 40, it really obscures things, right? Kind of makes it seem like, we got a ton of people going to get HEX. But remember, some people will read this and go, oh my God, so much HEX will be coming out. That's so many T-shares worth that, the market's going to go crazy. But this is the OA. So if the OA is not doing anything with that HEX out there in the future, then, it really doesn't matter. You can kind of take that off the page and not even worry about it. Kind of see where that goes. All right, we took a look at those. All right, so then we go look at exactly what's happening now. Let's look at our Quattro Cinco stakes created by Start. All right, so these are Quattro Cincos. There's more than Quattro Cincos that get made, but mostly if people are going out really long, they're going really close to Quattro Cinco. So it's a good way to kind of measure things. We look through October to January. We had a big month last month. In December, things have fallen off a little bit, but they're kind of back to maybe the norm. There's also a lot of stakes that end in December normally. A lot of the true believers would have gotten in back at the launch of HEX, and let's say they did a lot of stakes come out in the November-December timeframe. And so I guess it's likely that we would have seen an increase in December for that reason. Then you go out into January, which is almost over. Right, we only have 4 or 5 days left, so it looks like we'll come in below the average of these 4 months in terms of HEX stakes started. that are Quattro Cinco. Right. And we can also see on just looking at all stakes that have started, we've also seen a drop from December down below the average, in terms of new stakes, all new stakes. And things are super quiet. People are kind of like, I think they're wondering what the heck's going on in the world, never mind just crypto, and then crypto on top of that. So then we go, so we can see that we have staking going on. There's activity, extreme conviction, native staking out very long is occurring. And it is very intentional by the people who are actually doing that staking, right? We could also see that there are people doing short staking. They are doing shorter stakes and ladder stakes, and that's very intentional because they understand the ramifications of that, right? And so from that information, we can kind of go look and see, okay, so what does this look like when we get all the way out to 2041? Now remember, the OA has quite a bit of T-shares out there, right? Not only they have that 16 million, they have other T-shares that are coming out year over year, that kind of really make this hard to kind of game unless you really analyze all the detail. But when we get all the way out to 2041, where there is no way, it's a little cleaner, a little easier to see. People were doing the Quattro Cincos. To be a whale is 55 T-shares. 55 T-shares. And of course, longer pays better. So that's something like the equivalent of, I don't know, what's 55 divided by 3. So if somebody wanted to do a yearly stake right now and get 18 T-shares, let's call it, sake of argument, 20 T-shares. Something around 47,000, or excuse me, 44,000 level. What's that come out to be? So for just under a million, somewhere around 800,000 hex being staked, you can become a whale Quattro Cinco. A whale Quattro Cinco. And that's a pretty good clip of value, right? To be able to do that. I didn't check the price today. I guess we can go check the price, but I mean, I know it was pretty cheap for $1 million the last couple days. But I mean, we're talking about something in the 3,000 to 4,000 range per year, right? That somebody could actually do that right now at these current prices and become a whale year over year, if that's what ends up happening with prices that are out there. So that's what we got. All right. That's what I'm seeing with our numbers. All right. Let's go grab. Let's grab a different screen to pull up. You guys ask any questions in the chat. I'll run through it real quick, see what we got. See what we show up with. Let's see. I want to go look at share rate and boom. All right. All right. So taking a look at share rate changes that have occurred recently. So we had one today for 1.5 hex went up. You can see it happens day over day. There's days like the 22nd where we had 3 changes throughout the day. Because remember, these are all individually calculated based on end stakes. On the 17th, we did see a nice little burst, 348.5 hex per T-share. It went up in one day. Day before that, or not day before that, the change before that was 107 on the 13th. So this does continue. We take a look at our estimates coming out in the next 30 days. You can see how much hex is coming out. A lot of people do follow this, because they'll try to front run this or whatnot. I guess the assumption is that, if we have 500 million hex coming out on the 5th of February, that there'll be a big sale, but that's not always the case, right? It really depends on, what the dynamics are, what the what those actual wallets have been doing. But you can see that for the next 30 days, we look at the next 12 months, this big old huge amount that's coming out from the OA in March. Again, kind of dwarfs everything else, right? And we don't know what the OA will do with that, but we would expect. I mean, there's no promises, right? OA can do whatever it wants. But I don't expect that it would hit the market. It wouldn't make sense. I believe this is being used to create guardrails for the system, for how things operate. So we got quite a bit, 35 billion coming out in March. We'll wait and see what happens with that. All right, let's see. Let's go to. Now these are actuator numbers. So let's look at our Deci and Maxi. Deci out there, you can actually pick up Deci fairly cheap on the market. And assuming that these estimates roll out correctly, I'm estimating 2.36 hex per Deci to be paid out in 2032. So that's equivalent of a 28%-ish APR from now until then. So there are some people who are taking advantage of the Deci, and then the Maxi is looks like 14.76% APR through 2037. So there are some people who take advantage of that. It's a very thin market, though, so you have to be kind of careful about that. Right? You don't want to get hung up on doing too big of a purchase through there. You just have to be mindful. That's all. But I mean, if the HEX stake is paying, Quattro Cinco between 4 and 5%, then 28% is greater than 4 or 5%, and so there's that opportunity to do that. Right? So there will be some people who do that, and then we already looked at the 30-day, but again, there's our 30-day. So let's go look at the chat, see what we got out there. For people in there, I see Fast Abdul. He's always here for the tech. We got the Oscar with the Quattro Cinco boy. Quirch, good to see you. Acid Thunder, we're all here for the T-shares. Tam, good to see you. Hit the like and subscribe if you'd like to see that. Hex Wizard 369. Sephiroth, yeah, I mean, I'm guessing that's where it's at. I haven't done the calculation like this minute, but my last time I looked, Quattro Cincos were between 4 or 5%. Somebody could throw that in there in the chat. Hex Glenn, good to see you. All right. Will Stevenson, yep, longer does pay better. That's for sure. Let's see. Clash is saying, are there any whales that have enough hex bags to hold the pricing chain down for the foreseeable future until hex high sensor dollars? Yeah, I suppose they could be. Clash. I see that you're saying not to be taken seriously, but I mean, that's the question everybody has, right? I think that the liquidity is thin enough. Listen, I'm not going to be able to do it. I don't, my $100 ain't going to change anything, but I think as a community, if people wanted more hex and they rotated into hex, they certainly could affect the price. There would be some people who would take advantage of that, of course, and sell it back down. Bigger picture, market making wise, yeah, I mean, it could go up for sure, right? But it does require the market makers to do what market makers do, put their value on the line to accumulate the units, right? And that's kind of how that works, right? They would have to accumulate it and then push the price up. Now, is there enough to hold it back? Sure, but you know what? There was enough hex in the 10,000x run to hold it back too. It's all a matter. It's all a matter of scale, right, and ratio. And then the rest of it is people and what they do. Yeah. Now, what'll happen? I don't know. We'll watch and see. We'll have to wait and see. Coin Critic, good to see you. Caught 2 lives in a row. Appreciate the comment. Thanks for the content. Appreciate the time and effort. You're welcome, Mr. Critic. Yeah, baby. ES for stakers would be a good move for the convicted. When you say that, you're referring to the OA doing ESs. Yeah, yeah, it's possible that could happen. I don't think it's likely. But here's the thing: is even with emergency end staking, it would be good for the stakers, these people that have the stakes, sure, because they'll get a portion of that. But remember, the OA is like the majority holder of the T-shares now, and so two things happen. Somebody emergency end stakes half of the penalties go to the OA anyways, right? And then 90%, I'm just going to make up a number, it's close to 80, 90%. 90% of the rest of the penalties go to the OA. So 5%, gets sent out to the rest of the users, right? Some of which are the OA too, so even more. And whatever's left over, the OA gets as well, right? Because it gets its own tokens back. If the emergency end stake didn't like nuke the entire thing, it gets some back. So right now, the OA doing emergency end staking, yeah, it'll benefit users, sure. But it's not like over the top. It's not like it's like crazy over the top amounts that it would happen. I suppose if there was enough capitulation, maybe it would make a dent in things, but it's just a slow game. It's always boil the frog, man. That's it. It's boil the frog. Things happen as they happen, and you either, and most of us are not looking at things like 1.56 hex today, and it went up to 1.59. Wow, that's big, right? And most people aren't like, well, that's great. Went up 0.03. It's that it happens over time, and you see those increases, and then it catches up with you. It's pretty cool when that happens. But yeah. Now there's still the random pinata theory that Johnny Chaos talks about out there, right? That you can see these random stakes get done in emergency end stake. I haven't checked the emergency end stakes lately. I mean, I see them come through, but I haven't checked to see what amount is out there. But we haven't seen the capitulation, man. I mean, for all that we see for the emergency end stakes, and people are like, oh my God, can you believe it? For all that being said, there just isn't that much capitulation, which is another kind of either points to those being very strong hands, people who are in for the long term and are still in for the long term, and they're not willing to take the penalties to get out. Now, of course, previously we were talking about price. Somebody had asked me, what would it take? Yeah, of course, if HEX went up to $1, I would expect to see more emergency end stakes, right? But that just strengthens the system again, in that any HEX that doesn't actually get paid out gets locked up, right, in some way, shape, or form, either into existing stakes and pushed into the future, or the OA collects it. So we could see something like that. But again, we haven't seen the capitulation. Not yet. Anyways, we'd have to see some significant moves in price. And again, I deliberately, when I'm talking about the HEX staking, I'm trying to stay away from the discussion about price, because I think that is, too emotional and kind of like covers up the possibilities of earning from HEX. But that being said, just because I'm not talking about it in this manner with this, doesn't mean that things aren't possible. There's speculation all over the place about what could happen. I mean, I don't expect, this is just my thought, I would not expect the OA to come in with $400 million worth of value and buy all HEX, right? That would be silly, probably. But there's people that think that, right? And they speculate on that, and they speculate a portion of that will come in, and they'll speculate 10% will come in. You see the posts, right? And people doing the calculations on it. Would I like to see the price HEX go up? Sure. Yeah, of course I would. But I don't know what's going to happen. Right? Don't know. I'm still waiting to prove it. Prove X, Mr. Prove X. I don't know what's happening. Just have to wait. Everything we see is kind of like lagging, right? Lagging information. It's already happened, and we can say, "Wow, that made perfect sense." That made perfect sense. Coin Critic, yeah, I was looking back at that data too. 1 ETH is now 1.2 million hex. That's similar to day 33 of the AA. DCing again. If you know, you know. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting. I think 33 was the low, right? It was like the low. Well, listen, dude, I mean, I know you know this, and everybody else probably doesn't. You got to be careful what you're going to do. I mean, it's crypto. Obviously, things don't go the way we want it to go. All right, all the time. But that being said, put that aside for a moment. If you were suddenly going to decide that Hex was a great idea to stake, and you're going to build a ladder, now's a pretty good time to go do that. Right? If you're going to become super motivated to go stake, now's a pretty good time. If you don't have any Hex, that is, right? To go get Hex and get super motivated about creating stakes. You know, just like day 33 of the adoption amplifier was like a really good idea, a good day to develop that conviction and to go do that. That was a really good day. All right. Not so much at 45, 50 cents. Right. And so, yeah, I mean, you don't want to be, I think one of the lessons we probably learned during that, again, experimental phase, people trying to understand how Hex worked and et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, some of us got caught up in that. And you end up buying Hex at a very, very high price. And, you know, always wishing it had been cheaper, right? That's what everybody says. I just wish it was cheaper, right? Well, now it's cheaper. So here you go, right? We have it. But yeah, like I said, if you suddenly feel, if anybody listening, if you should reassess if you think in 6 months or a year you're suddenly going to decide to start doing it, right? Maybe you assess it now and figure out maybe now's a good time. And why? Because like Acid Thunder saying, it's super cheap, right? And then with everything that's going on, you know, there's a number of things I talked about. I just like that you said more reason to stake, loyal. Yeah, and again, this is the staking discussion, right? This is not, hey, what should I do if I'm trading and speculating? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about looking at the hex state, product market fit, how it works, what it does. And yeah, having, if you're into that and you're inside the walled garden or want to enter the walled garden, doing these hex stakes makes sense because it improves your position over time in terms of Hex, right? But everybody do your own research. You got to go look at the stuff, you know. You know, it's very much again, bond-like market as we proceed forward, right? I mean, you know, assuming, again, we'll just assume price doesn't drop any further, right? But if you're looking at price being stable-ish in a range, you know, kind of a range like this, and USD value over time, and then you're basically saying is, hey, listen, for the value that you put in, you can earn that 4%, 5%, and have exposure to the upside of Hex over time. And, you know, in that way, be able to peel off value as you see fit, as your stakes end, etc. You know, but again, as we showed, right, you can't do that forever. I mean, you can actually do that forever. I mean, recursively forever, but you do lose your power in the system over time with the loss of your T-shares, which might be fine too. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, if that's what somebody wants to do, what's wrong with that? I mean, it's an investment into something that they're interested in because they did their own research and they wanted to, you know, get set up with regular Hex income, and they did. You know, that's what it's here for. Part of the product market fit. All right. And Mr. Gomez, everybody hit the like button, share it out to somebody who's interested. You You share it out to people who aren't interested too. How about that? I think that's it. That's all I got for this this particular stream. Just kind of bring you up to date. Things are pretty normal in the old HEX ecosystem as far as how it's operating. I do think that it's continues to be a extreme R&R, you know, asymmetrical opportunity. But it does believe, you know, you got to believe, and that means you got to decide to believe, right? And you know, most people are hung up on recency bias. As am I. As am I. Right? I'm hung up on it too. All right, my friends. Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and end. And I don't know that I have anything to say about that Coin Critic. And Coin Critics asked, you already talked about the the PWBTC. I don't really comment a whole bunch on this stuff. I mean, I kind of knew what. I feel like I knew that the PRCs were all about, you know, bringing people in with the lure of free value, which meant that they're kind of a losing proposition unless the community really buys it up, which we did see some of that on PWBCT, right? But I don't know enough about what's happening technically out there. You know, with this, I mean, I see the posts, I see the scam posts, I see the posts about the liquidity being pulled down. I see it all. I mean, I assume that anything I have in terms of that stuff might be show up on the as a loss eventually. But yeah, what's going on with that? I don't know. I anecdotal, very high level. I did, if this is all true, I did like the idea that liquidity was pulled between PWBTC, the PRC copy, and Pulse, which protected the Pulse ecosystem a little bit, right? If that's really in fact true. I mean, I do like that happened, but again, I don't know what's going on. You know, I mean, there's just so many false narratives, and I don't know what they are. That's one of the reasons I kind of like the HEX contract. I really don't need anybody to whisper in my ear about what it's doing. I just go look, and that's what we're doing. We're looking at it. That's why I go over the stuff and we see it there. We can actually see what it is. Oh, yeah, you're talking about again PWBCC. Max supply is stable. That's true. I don't believe that. I assume that no more can be printed. I don't know the answer to that. And you know, as far as Maker still being locked, I don't know. People were talking about it not being locked. How much HEX to be a whale, bro? I don't even know, man. I don't even know. Whale's just 1%, right? So quite a bit. Quite a bit. We'd have to go look at the chart and see what it is, but right, because what 10%'s a Poseidon, 1%'s a whale, if you want to look at it that way. So quite a bit of HEX. All right. You guys be good. And we'll see you the next time around, and we'll be back. And if you're on the East Coast of the U.S., be careful. Snow. Lots of snow.
Yo, T. Urgent HEX buy signal. Charts flaming hot.
Golden ratio, huh? That's how legends stack T-shares.
Get them while they're crispy, folks. This window won't stay open long.
Stake smart. Win big. Time rewards those who act.
Stay crispy, Hexicans.
You gotta move it, move it! Feel the rhythm of the blockchain.